Welcome back to Burnout Break Room, the podcast that's like a break room but helpful, where we look at burnout through a realistic lens, talk about ways to take a break from the grind, and spill the tea. I'm Caitlan Truhella, creativity coach and speaker.
And I'm Lindy Larimore, licensed therapist and certified career coach.
We're your hosts, and thank you for joining us here in the Burnout Break Room. How you doing, Lindy?
Not bad. Summer's wrapping up, although by the time people are hearing this, we might be into fall. I don't know. But we're in this moment. Summer is wrapping up. I will share in case anyone, benefits from this that I definitely like last week I kind of ran into a little bit of, I'll call it low key burnout.
Mm,
And I discovered for myself that I was on my phone too much.
mm,
And so I just had to start making some decisions about the amount that I was using my phone and what I was using it for. And I put it down and I feel like a new human.
mm. Love that. And it's interesting that you say that too, because I feel like a little bit of self-awareness and also, being honest with ourselves about our daily and weekly habits and stuff like that and checking in about how we're actually feeling makes a really big difference too, because when we're aware of things when they start small, we can address them before they get bigger. So I really appreciate you sharing that. I can be honest and share that I experienced something similar, although it's not, I don't consider it as so much like being on my phone a lot, but I was doing a lot of the like listening to YouTube while I was doing other things. So it was kind of like that multitasking. And I realized that I started to prioritize work that I could multitask with in that way. So yeah, taking some time to like reprioritize what needs my attention and in the same way spend less time online has made a really big difference for me as well. It actually resulting in me writing more. So kudos there.
Caitlin, it's so funny. We talk about all these very elaborate things that we've done to walk away from burnout. We've, quit careers, we've started businesses. It was a great reminder that, oh, I could also just put my phone, I could text less. Huh.
Mm,
And you're right. Like my brain feels far more clear. I feel the multitasking. So exactly to your point, Caitlin, it sounds like we're in a similar chapter. I was texting while doing other things.
mm,
And so it became this constant like I'm doing this thing, but I have this person to get back to. So it felt like there was that ADHD thing where if I don't do it now, it'll never get done. So it just felt like a constant kind of thing hanging over my head. So I I stopped thinking so much about that. I started remembering that the thing about text messages is you don't have to answer right away.
mm-hmm.
And so I now have a much more clear head because I'm doing one thing at a time. Like you're basically exactly what you just said.
I feel that so much. And honestly, I feel like I came to that realization when I was giving somebody else advice, ironically enough.
Uh-huh.
So, a friend of mine was in the process, like we were in the process of hanging out, and they were at the same time trying to text their like work friend back about some like book recommendations because the friend had asked for like a list of like four or five within a particular genre. And so we're talking, and they're saying to me, like, man, I can only think of four. Like, this is taking more time because I can't think of a fifth one to recommend them. And of course, like in all the brilliance of, being a third person to a situation, I was like, well, why is four not good enough? Like, this isn't a homework assignment. And they physically stopped and like looked up from the phone and were like, you're absolutely right. Four is fine. Send, done. So now I need to take my own advice.
Yes, exactly. And, there was a time when, even in work situations, text messaging wasn't the norm, right? It wasn't
Hmm.
normal to be getting text messages from your boss while also in a meeting, while also trying to work in a spreadsheet, right? Like that wasn't expected or part of the norm. So I think this also can apply to work situations. Like, can you wait until the end of a task to answer that ping or that Teams or that text message or whatever it is?
Hmm.
Usually, yes. And even if that means training your boss a little bit that, oh, I want to make sure I'm doing quality work. So I might get back to you after I'm finished this task.
Yes, absolutely. I think so much, and maybe it's also just because like I've been on a kitchen nightmares kick, like while I'm doing my indoor bike. But the kind of communication like in a kitchen, like how much time left on that salmon, chef? And 2 minutes.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's like that very, very clear communication and like expectation. And yeah, sometimes you do have to train your manager a little bit because I remember, if I had responded to every individual Teams message that just said, "Hey,"
Oh, geez. Hmm.
how derailing is that?
Hmm. Hmm. We get nothing done. We would get nothing
Hmm.
done. Yeah, because not everyone necessarily thinks along those lines. And so sometimes it's pretty radical to think of your time in that way, but you might teach your coworkers and or do some managing up in order to
Hmm.
to get your work done and not feel burned out at the end of the day.
Hmm. Yep. I think of Daryl from The Office when he was learning more about time management skills and like time, hacking and productivity and stuff like that. And somebody comes into the break room and is like, "Oh, what you reading?" And he was like, this is awesome. It's all about time hacking and like time batching, do the same type of tasks together so that you can like be more productive and be more efficient. Like I brushed my teeth in the shower this morning, which saved me like 2 minutes, which I just spent telling you about this. Damn it.
So, speaking of time management,
Hmm.
we have a bit of an unusual episode for you today. I had the pleasure of speaking to a friend and colleague, Marie Nagode, who kind of I know and actually through my former church gig as a singer, I performed in churches. And it was such a great reminder that so this is a woman that I've known for years as an alto and as a flautist. And she approached me when she found out about the podcast and said, I really want to tell my story. And I was like, that's great. I also knew her to be a yoga instructor. So I was like, okay, this is great. Do you have a business you want to promote? And she said, no, I just want to tell my story. And I have to say, Caitlan, I was just floored by this by Marie's story. Again, I've known her for years. I had no idea. And I really feel like
Hmm.
folks can learn a lot from her story and, about boundaries and saying no and about, when to walk away from something that seems almost like be careful what you wish for sometimes because you'll get the thing you wish for and then you might find out it's not, it's not serving you after a certain amount of time.
Hmm.
Such a wonderful conversation. I think we both like got teary at one point or another. It was really wonderful. I will say the setting was so cool. We recorded at Medfield State Hospital, so in Massachusetts and probably throughout the country, but I'm not 100% sure. They had state hospital programs. Did they have this in California, Caitlan?
State hospitals?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I guess it's a national thing. I've never actually like paid attention. So yeah, so this was the original version of like a mental health hospital. And Medfield State is famous for being part of the set of Shutter Island. So if you've seen Shutter Island, you've seen Medfield State.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a beautiful day, wonderful spot. Felt both. It's very scenic and very haunting. The setting, especially if you know the history of state hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little windy, so we had pretty good recording equipment, but you can definitely hear some wind. And at one point, you might even hear that we get a visit from a very friendly dog that ended up in my lap at one point. So it was a wonderful recording and opportunity to hear Marie's story.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us, Lindy. And we definitely look forward to hearing Marie's story. So, without further ado, we take you to Medfield State Hospital in Massachusetts. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone. It's Lindy. Welcome to the Burnout Break Room. We're doing something a little unusual today. I am sitting here with a very good friend of mine, Marie Nagode. So today we're going to be talking to Marie because a little bit outside of the typical format of our podcast, just a conversation across a picnic table over some coffee about what it is to be someone who's experienced burnout, who has come out the other side, and who wants to share their story of recovery. So I know Marie through my former church gig as a soprano for a church choir. I know Marie as a lovely alto, a talented flautist, and a yoga instructor. But Marie, I'd love for you to share a little bit about who you are, what you've done.
Where to begin? Let's begin at the beginning. So I was born in this area, so I have a lot of history walking these grounds, which is always kind of nice to be back. I used to walk here with my dad a long time ago. I grew up one town away in Millis, for those of you in Massachusetts who know the area. I'm the oldest of 4 children, and I think in the context of our conversation today, I think that's important to mention because I think as the oldest of 4 children, I took on the role of caretaker at a very young age.
Of course.
And as I look back over my journey, I realize how that sort of impacted life decisions and the way I carried myself through life. So growing up as the oldest of 4 siblings, an Irish family where you're just kind of expected to always toe the line and set the right example. There was a lot of pressure on me to work hard, set a good example, don't ask questions, put your head down, do it. And I know I'm not alone in that. So that sort of formed the way I lived my young life. Music has always been a tremendous part of my life. And honestly, I think that it was my savior. I was a I picked up the glockenspiel when I was in 3rd grade, and I was all of 3 feet, some inches tall. And after trying to carry it home from school for about 6 weeks, my band director said to me, maybe you should pick a different instrument. And that's how I ended up playing the flute. But honestly, from that point forward, I never looked back. So music has always played a really important part in my life to help me find my social circles, to help me sort of step out of my own head into something. As a musician, sometimes you can set everything aside and be in the moment with your music. As an adult, when I graduated from high school, I moved on to college in Vermont. I was a Reformed Catholic at that point, and ironically ended up at a Catholic college, which was actually kind of nice because it helped me really sort of understand all the things that I didn't understand about the religion that I was raised in. So I graduated college, moved back home, and at the time, you were expected to come home from school and get a job. So I was working as a genetic research scientist. I was a biology major in college, and I worked at Brandeis University, also here in Massachusetts, studying fruit flies for about 18 months. My dream was, going back to why I chose biology as a major, I was convinced that I could find the cure for Down syndrome. I had worked over the summers at the Charles River Ark in Needham with a variety of levels of adults, and really found that that spoke to me. And so that was my mission, but it didn't quite end up that way. But anyway, on to Brandeis, studying fruit flies, irradiating their brains to figure out which genes impact the brains in the fruit flies, which scientifically there's some parallel to they can sort of extrapolate from fruit flies to mice and then to humans. And about 18 months in, I just had this crushing feeling that I was not in the right place. And so I came home and I said to my dad, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. I'm 22 years old. I want to move out. I want to have a life, but I'm making $6,000 a year in 1982. So that wasn't feasible. So at the time, he suggested that I sort of pivot. And long story short, I went to work for a tech company that was founded by one of our neighbors in the community where I had grown up, a friend of my dad's. They took me on, they took a risk on me. I mean, I was a scientist, right? Yeah. And they put me behind a computer and my career just sort of took off from there. So for the next 20 or so years, I worked in the tech field. And, I just kind of rode the wave. I wasn't making a lot of intentional decisions about what I want to be. And maybe that was because I had done that in my previous, objectives, and it didn't work out, but I was having fun. I worked for Lotus Development in Cambridge. I was employee number 270. So I was on the ground floor. I really got to see what it's like to work for a startup and watch it grow. So that, I got a lot of really good business experience. I moved into a role as a telemarketer, working for, selling to schools. And before I knew it, I ended up in Chicago. And
like you do.
Right.
Like
as one does. One responds to their boss when they say, we need you in Chicago in 2 weeks. You say yes, because it seemed like an adventure.
Yes.
So from there, I ended up moving into sales and account management and spent the next 10 years, 8 to 10 years, moving from Chicago and eventually landing in Atlanta, where I spent almost 8 years. And during that time, I just was telling my kids a story the other day because one of my son's friends is having a similar experience. I had been moved from our corporate headquarters in Cambridge with the promise that I would be moved back because my ultimate goal was to be back close to my family and close to my friends and my roots. And I ended up in Atlanta, and the people in Atlanta said, we're not moving you back. And so I had a decision to make, and it was one of the first times that I realized that I really had to advocate for myself. I couldn't just let it flow. And so I quit my job and found another job, and then quit that job because it wasn't a good fit, and had a couple more experiences like that where I was trying things on and they weren't fitting. And to make matters even more complicated, because that's the way I roll.
Sure.
I bought a house in the middle of all this. So there was no predictable income flow, but there's a mortgage. So there's pressure. And I remember waking up one day and saying to myself, 3 strikes, you're out, corporate America. Can't do this anymore. So I took a step back and started thinking about the things that I was really good at, which were people, teaching. I had always had a calling for teaching, teaching Sunday school when I was living at home. I was a TA in college, in biology lab. So teaching sort of came naturally to me, and it was an affinity that I couldn't ignore. And the tech thing was there too. So I blended them together and started a consulting company. And for the next 8 years, that's what I did. My first client was Home Depot in Atlanta, and I reworked their entire computing system, which was really quite challenging. And I look back and I think, wow, I did that. But what's really interesting, sort of trying to tie it back to the whole burnout thing, was I didn't see those things as great things, as huge accomplishments. I just saw them as a matter of course. And people would say to me, do you realize what you're doing and what you've built and how you're impacting these companies? And I would look at them and say, no. And so I think there was some messaging going on behind the scenes that was just sort of bringing me back to the just do it kind of mentality.
Yes.
So fast forward, a few more years, and I came back to this area. My dad was very sick in 2004, and I moved back because it was important for me to be here for however much longer he had to live. And my sister was getting married. There was a lot of family stuff going on, and I never really felt like I had a really strong family network of support. I was always sort of the black sheep. I was the one who left. There was some dysfunction in my family that once you put distance between that and yourself, you can see it a little more clearly. And coming back, I had framed it completely differently. And so there were some times when my family just, they didn't understand me. So I kind of felt like an outlier.
Yes.
So I just decided I'll just kind of live my life, start out at my business again. Loved living in the city, and that was sort of that's the wrap on my sort of corporate business. And then in 1995, I met my husband, and that was fortuitous. I mean, we met through a mutual friend at a party, and I had convinced myself that I would never be married, that I would never have children. And then he came along, and here we are, 3 kids later.
Yes.
3 kids, 2 dogs, 28 fish, 4 cats.
And we don't even live on a farm, which is the ironic thing. I was going to say, where's the white picket fence?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So our courtship was fast. I mean, we met in 1995. We were married in 1997, and I had my first baby 3 weeks after our first anniversary.
Wow.
So and again, it was kind of, not. I remember having a moment one day prior to meeting my husband where I was walking down the street in Post Office Square in Boston. I could tell you even what I was wearing.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to myself, I want to get married and I want to have kids. Like, I don't even know what happened.
Wow.
But that was the switch. And I think for so long I had been pushing it away because of my experience with my family that I just I assumed that I wasn't cut out for it. And then once I put that out to the universe, I really believe that is why Stuart and I found each other. He's from Oklahoma. I mean, what are the chances? What are the chances? So he and I had a mutual friend. I was working in one of those corporate office suite type things where we had a shared secretary, and this guy, Rob, and I became lunch buddies. And he said to me one December, he said, my wife and I are having a Christmas party. You should come. And I was like, I'm over socializing. I'm just going to hole up in my apartment and get to the holidays. And then I changed my mind and brought my friends, walked into this party, looked down the hallway, and there was my future, which was kind of cool. So at that point, we accelerated our courtship, decided we were going to get married, had our first child. And it was clear to me that I couldn't do both my business and be a mom. So I sold my business. Thankfully, one of the women who was working for me was at the other stage of her life where her youngest was launching, and she was ready. So that was an easy transition. But nobody prepared me for being a mom. I didn't have a good role model as a mom. And as a result, I didn't really feel like I knew what I was doing. I felt like I got thrown into the deep end of the pool. And that was the first time where I really thought, I can't breathe. I don't know what to do. I mean, my oldest son was a pretty easy baby. He came out of the chute, slept through the night at 6 weeks, really chill. My daughter, not so much.
Sure.
And when I had her, I suffered from postpartum depression. And that sort of sunk me deeper into this whole, I can't fix it, I'm helpless, but I need to be the caretaker. And I just felt like I lived those years in a state of conflict. And I say this a lot to my kids and to my friends, like the body remembers all that stuff. Like the trauma, I know trauma gets, I sometimes feel like the word trauma is overused, but I do also feel that it's appropriate to say that a lot of these things in my life were traumatic without me even being harmed outwardly.
Sure.
So by the time I became a mom, all of this stuff was inside, but I couldn't press it down anymore. Right? And so that was when I started to realize, okay, I need to do something about this. And I started therapy, which was a lifesaver. And I am thankful that my husband was very supportive. And, my kid, I went on to have a third child, and I assumed the role of being a mom, but I couldn't let go of this other part of my identity. Of course. Right. And I think some people do that really well. I'd like to think that I did it really well some of the time, but I was always saying yes to other things. And I remember by the time my son Owen was born, he was the only one that we hired sort of a part-time caretaker for. I was home completely with the other two kids, but I had, at the time that he was born, I had committed to help a friend of mine start a preschool, because as one does, when you have 3 kids under the age of 5, you start a preschool. And I think there was some level of guilt associated with that, because I really wish that I had been able to stay home with Owen like I did with the other two. Yeah, so then kids were born. We got a couple of dogs. Life was, chaotic, but in the most beautiful way. My dad passed away, sadly. My sister got married and had her 2 children. And life kind of went on. And then as we moved forward, my husband had a number of health issues. He had a heart attack in 2010, totally unexpected. And that sort of put me in the role of caretaker on steroids, right? Yep. Because I had to buffer my children. Yep. I had to navigate the whole unknown of the situation with my husband. Yep. And I will say, thankfully, the silver lining of that heart attack in 2010 is they found a heart defect that would have killed him if he had not had the heart attack. So, we revamped our life. I became the fixer. I became the, we're going to eat healthy meals. We're going to, we're going to keep structure in the house, everything in its place. And the only person who wasn't getting any attention or any support was me. I didn't realize it at the time. This is all retrospective, as I think it probably is for a lot of people. So we moved forward. He recovered from his heart attack. Life is busy. We've got 3 kids playing sports and music. And I was happy. I was fulfilled. I thought, you know what? If I had to define what kind of a mom I wanted to be, I kind of feel like this would be it. Yeah. So that was my identity. And then my oldest graduated from high school and he went off to college. And I started to see the next phase of things where everybody had told me they're going to peel off and they're going to start getting their own lives. And that happened 1 year, and then 2 years later, my daughter, and then 3 years later, my son. And around the time, but before when he graduated from middle school and went on to high school, I'd been given some thought at the advice of some friends to what do I want to do next? And at that time, I had been doing yoga since 2003 when Owen was born. And I had done some certifications in kids yoga and some mindfulness certifications and things like that. And I thought, well, going kind of in the same vein that I did when I started my computer consulting business. What do I like? What am I good at? What fits in my life? And it was yoga and meditation. So I approached the school where he was going, and he was going to graduate. And I said, I know he's leaving. He's my last one. All 3 of my kids had finished 8th grade at the school. I don't want to leave. Is there a place for me? And they found a place for me. And so for the next 8 years, I built a program around student and school wellness, starting from nothing. And it was really kind of like blank slate. What would you do? We started with kindergarten yoga, and it sort of mushroomed from there. And my head was down. I was just doing it, common theme, right? Just get through the day, do it. And I was enjoying it until one day I looked up and I was teaching 15 classes a week. And I was coming home from work, and my husband was looking at me and he was like, something's not right. You're coming home and you're sleeping for 2 hours. You're getting up, you're cooking dinner, and you're going back to bed. And in the midst of all that, as you know, COVID, right? So, and COVID affected schools as significantly as any other population, I think. And as the wellness teacher, the expectation was that I was going to bring this calm and this wellness and well-being to the community. And I didn't have it. I was freaked out. I mean, I would go to the grocery store and sit in the parking lot and cry for 20 minutes. And I just started to have a little bit of imposter syndrome because I kept thinking to myself, if the wellness teacher isn't well, how can she bring that to her students? And that began the beginning of my realization that I had exceeded my capacity. Yes. Right. And I remember driving to work one day and saying to myself, where's the joy? I've lost my joy.
Mm.
And that was such a pivotal moment, Lindy, because I realized at that point that everything that my husband had been saying, and when somebody says something to me, it would be nice for me to take it under, in a constructive way. But a lot of times the Irish in me gets her back up and says, I can prove you wrong, right? And so I worked harder, because if you work harder, of course, things are going to get easier, but the reverse happened. So 2.5 years ago, my husband had open heart surgery. And at that point, I took some time off from work. I just said to my boss, I can't do both, and my priority has to be him. And I'll tell you, it was about 5.5 weeks that I took off. And in those 5.5 weeks, everything shifted. My priorities shifted. I had that distance that I described before of being far enough away where I could see that I was doing more damage to me, and I was being less effective as a practitioner to my students. And I went back to work after the March break that the school had, and I gave my notice. And I just said, and it came as a complete surprise to everybody, because I'm really good at covering things up, put on the happy face, and I think that, for me, the happy face in the mirror sometimes frames my mental attitude, but there's only so much of that you can do.
Yeah.
So my intention was, when I gave my notice, was to take a year, because I realized that at that point I was 62. I'll be 65 in November, and I was 62. And 62 years of this wasn't going to unwind itself in a month, right?
Really?
Maybe not even a year. But I felt like if I could start with a year, and if I could get through a year, I'd see where I went from there. And so I just went to ground. I just said, you know what? I'm not going to do anything that has anything to do with what I've been doing, except for meditating, because that was kind of my daily, that was what grounded me. And it was a struggle on, peeling myself back from that, work ethic, if you will, the feeling that I've always got to be doing something. And I think in some ways that always doing something was a coping mechanism, because I could ignore all the other stuff if I was just powering through. Yeah. Right?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that was a real struggle. And I had to actually make a contract with myself. I had to write it down and just say, these are the things that you say to yourself when you're feeling this. And these are some of the things you can do when you're feeling this. And so I started walking. I started taking much better care of my own self, sleeping. I had some medical issues. I believe they were all exacerbated by the stress of everything that was going on. So I gave myself permission to take care of me. And I found some great doctors, and I found a great therapist, and I had a great support from my husband. He was just like, I just want you back, right? I just want you to be happy. And if that means that you don't ever work again, that's okay. And we're in a fortunate position to be able to do that. I will say, I will acknowledge that. And after about a year, I could start to feel the creep. I mean, I enjoyed the year. I reconnected with friends that I hadn't seen, and read way more books than I have ever read as an adult, which was reading is my thing. Re-immerse myself in my music, which has been just so great, because that is also, as I think I mentioned, my social connection.
Yes.
My 2 musical groups that I play in right now, they are my people.
Yes.
And so that is something that I am hopeful will not go away ever. But about a year in, I was starting to get that little tingle in the back of my head, like, what's next? What are you going to do? Our youngest son was at that point, had just finished his freshman year in college, and he was launched. I felt like if he survived his freshman year, then I could say, okay, he's going to be all right.
Yeah.
So I remember very, very clearly, we were down at the beach. We spend a week in Rhode Island every year, and it was a rainy day. And I said to my husband, I'm just going to walk to the beach and listen to the waves, and maybe I'll find some seashells or some starfish or whatever. And I climbed up into the lifeguard chair, and I was looking out over the water, and this voice said to me, this is what you need to do. And out of my mouth, without any prompting, said, I need to start teaching adult yoga again. And that's when I knew I was ready. That's when I knew that I had taken enough time for me. I'd hit the reset button, maybe not all the way, but enough to where I felt like I was grounded again. and I was sleeping. I was, my relationships were all in a good place. Um, I had put myself at the top of the list, which I think was the very first time in my life that I had done that. And so now, here we are, 2025, and I'm kind of, I go back and forth with, should I be doing more? Should I not be doing more? But, I feel like I'm in a different phase of life now. My oldest son is engaged. He'll be married next year, and we love her and her family. My daughter will be right after them. I think she's just waiting for her brother to get married. My youngest son is graduated from college, and he's embarking on a year-long adventure in Europe in September, because why not?
Sure.
And I really feel like those are the things that I can celebrate now, because Stuart and I talk about this all the time. Like, we did this, right? But when you're in it, you're not necessarily thinking about that. So I guess in summary, what does my life look like now? Like, I've come through this journey of recognizing the problems, acknowledging the feelings, living through the pain, dealing with the medical issues. And now, I'm going to turn my paper over.
Yes.
I feel like my life is not always roses. There are always things that bubble up, but that's life, right? But I feel much more in control of the things that I'm saying yes and no to.
Yes.
And that, to me, if I can model that for my kids, I feel like that, if I can do it for myself and then model it for my kids, I think that's super important. The other thing that has been a struggle for me in the last few years is this whole idea of getting older. It happens, right? I mean, for a long time I said, oh, it's just a number. My husband and I are 6 months apart in age. So this spring, he went through the transition to Medicare. And we were having dinner with a couple of friends, and they were saying, you just wait until it's your turn. Something changes inside you. And there's the Irish, right? And he's saying, oh no, it's not going to change for me. But rather than looking at it as, oh my gosh, I'm getting older, I'm going to be 65 and I'm going to be on Medicare, I'm really, really being intentional about saying, I am moving into the next phase of my life, and I have so much to look forward to. And that really is keeping me, on the days when I get up and I'm like we all are, I think, you know what? I've got so much to be thankful for, and I have the time now to notice it, whereas before I didn't. And the other silver lining of having an empty house is that now my husband and I get to sort of revert back to where we were. We've been married for 26 years. 26? It'll be 28. Don't tell him I messed that up. I always think of my son's age and I add one. So it'll be 28 in 28 years next year. So 27 this June. And for a long time, we didn't even divide and conquer. We were zone defense with 3 kids, right? So one was going one way, the other was going the other. He was running thankfully, a really successful business. So we kind of were living parallel lives a lot. And by the end of the day, there was nothing left for each other. And we've had some really great conversations around how important it is now that we have that time to make that time. And so I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, thank you so much. What I'm enjoying about this conversation, first of all, is your openness and vulnerability, but also I've known you for 8 years now. So I'm thinking back to the timeline and remembering conversations we've had and the timing of those conversations, and how I feel like around the time when some of the deeper work was happening, I remember I'd be lining up in the back of the church, in my choir robe, and you and I would connect, and it would be a really deep connection.
Yes.
Very suddenly, and for 2 minutes, and then I'd go off and sing a hymn, and then, but also just when you talked about, I was so struck when you talked about the smile, like putting that smile, staring in the mirror, putting the smile on your face, because the other thing I've always known about you and Stuart was the smile, right? Like, my vantage point from where I've always been sitting is I can look and see everyone's faces.
Right.
And just stare at them for no one notices that that's what I'm doing.
Right.
I'm always a therapist. I'm paying attention.
You are.
Right. And you always had this, it's funny because you always had this kind of serenity vibe, right? And And now I'm hearing that you were also very much struggling at
Yes.
times, and very much. And you know, I also recognize that in certain communities, it's not always the thing to do to like come in and be like, listen, people, I'm struggling too.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. That, you know, some communities I think are a little bit more about, you know, putting on your Sunday best, literally and figuratively, and showing up in whatever way feels okay in that space. But some of the things that I was taking notes, and some of the things that really jumped out at me, I'm just going to name them.
Okay.
The first thing was when you said you were talking about early on in your career, and I decided to advocate for myself, like it was the first time in your life. The other thing that jumped out at me was, you know, it's funny, Marie, these parallel lives. I used to work at Home Depot. I'm sure I used your computer system. It was actually really impressive.
Thank you.
Like it really was. My dad actually used to train people on it. And
Oh, no kidding.
yes, yeah. That was his job.
How small a world is that,
Such
right?
a small world. And it was a very impressive and intuitive system. I should have known a woman designed it, of course. Of course, it was very intuitive. So, you know, you've touched so many lives without even knowing it. And to hear that you never recognize your accomplishments blows my mind. Blows my mind. And I'm not at all surprised. Not at all surprised. And then when you mentioned you started saying yes, my question is, and we can come back to this, were you also saying no? Like when you started, yes. So like, it seems as if you started saying yes to yourself and to your needs, but I'm curious to know if that required saying no to other things that maybe you would not have felt comfortable saying no to make room for the yes for yourself.
I suspect yes. I can't think of a particular example, but I always come back to this conversation that I had with the head of school at my kids' middle school, which is when you add something somewhere, you have to take something away from someplace else, right? Whether it's a subject or saying yes versus no. So I imagine that it was probably timed with, you know, the eye-opening ability to advocate for myself and to recognize my personal limits. So I also believe that at that point I started prioritizing and what are the things that either are necessary, because at that point I was still very much a mom and a homemaker, but also what are the things that, if, you know, beyond being necessary, how is this going to serve me? Right. And that whole concept of being selfish is one that I was never taught as a child. I mean, my self-worth was always from a young age based on everyone else, on what I did for other people, on how I made other people look. And so for me, that was a revelation. And it was hard. I mean, it was one of those things where, you know, I would have internal battles about, am I being too selfish? If I want to do this, you know, it was a function of deciding how much of myself I was prepared to give to other people, not realizing that I was giving pretty close to 100% of myself to my family already. So there wasn't a lot of buffer. There wasn't a lot of stuff left. And that is when I started getting back into my music. After my youngest son was born, that's when my husband encouraged me to start finding time for me. That's when yoga entered my life. And I had been doing yoga on and off, you know, over the years since college, but that's when yoga took a front seat for me in terms of survival. I mean, I can't even tell you, a 5-minute power nap in Shavasana was like the gift of the day every Saturday morning. And my music and being able to fit these things around the responsibilities that I had. And then be able to say, you know, that's not going to work for me. You know, can you host Thanksgiving dinner this year? I'm sorry, I can't. I just don't have the bandwidth.
So there's the no.
There's the no.
Yes. And a couple of things are coming to mind for me. I so appreciate that you named caregiver early on and recognize that that's how you were socialized, raised to be, the position you were in your family. and maybe a little bit, and you can tell me, if that also feels like part of your identity genuinely. Like, I'm wondering if part of this journey has been sifting through what am I told I was supposed to be and what do I actually feel that I am.
Right.
And that can always be a challenging journey.
Mm-hmm.
So the burnout book, which we mentioned on the podcast often, by the Nagode twins, they talk about caregiver syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
So the first chapter of the book is about burnout and recovery. So done, right? Solved. And then the next whole part of the book is all of the ways in which our society contributes to burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about caregiver syndrome as there are just certain pockets of our society that are told that they have to be caregivers. Their role is to care.
Yep.
And to give. Or no, sorry, it's giver syndrome. I'm sorry, it's giver syndrome.
Okay.
But it's
general,
very aligned with
okay.
caregivers. Yeah, giver syndrome. And so the nature is my role is to give, not to take.
Yeah.
Never to take. The alternative that we've discovered, thanks to great colleagues and couples counselors, is provider syndrome. So it doesn't just affect women; the society affects all of us,
mm-hmm.
right? So if Stuart were here, maybe he'd have some thoughts on that. You were also a provider, though,
yeah.
in your family. So when I talk to people, often women, about boundaries, the initial conversation is always like, yeah, that sounds great. This is awesome. I'm fully on board. And then they come back to the next week, be like, I set a boundary. It's terrible. I never want to do it again, because of like the guilt,
yeah.
and followed by the shame of who am I? Who am I to say no?
Right.
So I'm curious to know for you, Marie, like, walk me through what I'm assuming was some guilt and maybe even some shame through the process of starting to say yes to yourself, to say no to others,
mm-hmm.
maybe identify less as a caregiver or in a different way.
Yeah. So the example that comes to mind
mm-hmm.
is related to my immediate family, my birth family, which has always been, it's been a very big struggle.
Sure.
I have 2 brothers and a sister, and I am very close with one brother and his family, and really don't talk to the other brother. And my sister and I have had a fraught relationship for a really long time. And this particular example is related to prioritizing me around the holidays. So my birthday is at Thanksgiving every year. Every year for Thanksgiving, we all get together as a family. We, celebrate the holiday, and at some point somebody sings happy birthday, and maybe there's a cake, and maybe there's some presents. And as I was growing up, it was fun because I came from a really big Italian family on my mother's side and a relatively small family on my dad's Irish side. But we always, it was always an excuse to get everybody together.
Yes.
But as we got older and our lives started to take on more of the individuality as they do when you are adults, it just became a struggle.
Yeah.
It was really, really hard. And, it started to feel very contrived. And while my mother was still alive, I respected that, it was more for her than it was about any of us. There came a day at Thanksgiving when I was at my family's house, and we left and we were on our way home, and I turned to my husband and I said, I'm never doing that again. I'm never doing that to myself, and I'm never doing that to our kids and to you. So the following year comes around, and the expectation is that we're going to do Thanksgiving. And I said to my husband, we have to have a conversation with the kids. And I was terrified to have this conversation with my own children about my needs, because I felt like it would make me look selfish and weak. And we sat them down at the dinner table and we said, how would you guys feel about changing up our routine at Thanksgiving this year? Just to see, it's Mom's birthday is on Thanksgiving Day. She really wants to do X. How would you guys feel? And they, to a child, my oldest at the time was maybe 12, which would have made my daughter 10 and my younger son 8.5 or 9. They looked at me and they said, it's about time, Mom.
Wow.
Like out of the mouths of babes, right?
Wow.
So I just looked at my husband and I looked at them and I started to cry. And I was just like, why didn't you guys tell me? And they said, because we thought you were okay with it.
Yeah.
There's the smile,
You said
right?
yes.
Going, I was
Smile.
saying yes.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So we agreed that we would say no.
Mm.
And then I had to present that to my mom and my sister.
Mm.
And that was really, really hard.
Mm.
And so I made a way too big a production of it. We
Sure.
went out of town. We went away for the weekend. We went to my brother's, my brother up in New Hampshire, and we had a great, great holiday.
Mm.
But it was a period of years before I could really let go, because my sister wouldn't let it go.
Yeah.
She kept calling me every year saying, we need to do this. We need to get together for the holiday. And I was like, actually, we have other plans.
Mm.
And then the plans became, we're running away out of town,
Yeah.
just to put distance between us two. We've identified 2 families who are familyless.
Yeah.
And so they became our family, because you can pick your friends.
Yeah.
You can't pick your family. And so it's become this beautiful community.
Mm.
And I just said to my husband last Thanksgiving, like, where would we be if we had never made that decision?
Mm.
We'd still be toeing the line.
Yeah.
And but the struggle was real. Like the guilt of every year for my whole life. I mean, even when I lived in Chicago and Atlanta, I was expected to be home for the holidays, even if I had to sort of, rework my work schedule or come up with an excuse to have a meeting here in Boston so I could get the company to pay for my trip.
Yeah.
So letting go of that was really was hard, but it's probably it's one of the best things that I did at the beginning of this whole process. But it's also allowed me to have very honest conversations with my kids about the things that, if your gut is telling you it isn't right, it probably isn't right, kind of thing. Listen to your gut, and it's okay to say no. And I'd like to think that I have begun to model that for them, and I did it at an age where maybe they were still impressionable enough to understand. And my daughter is still, of my 3 kids, my daughter is the one who still has that latent guilt. Like if she can't make something, she'll say, "Are you sure you're okay with it?" And I'm just like, you know what? This is your life, Jackie. You're 26 years old. You have a busy life, and I will make demands on you, but I am okay if you say, "Geez, Mom, I just can't." I have too much work going on, or she's in the fitness field and she tends to be like me, puts her head down, says yes to a lot, and then wakes up one day and doesn't realize why she's sick.
Oh yeah,
right.
Of course.
So if you need a day and you just need to turn your phone off and just hang in the apartment and watch movies or sleep, that's what you need to do. So I'm hoping that, it took me a long, long time. I mean, this happened when I was in my mid to late 50s. And she's half my age, so.
But isn't it lovely that your children, especially Jackie, has this model of a woman, a badass woman who's done all the things, all of the things, right? Who knows how to say no, and who can model this term is way overused, but I've yet to come up with a better one, self-care, right? And you live it, like you're living it maybe for the first time, I'm hearing, like truly you're starting to truly embody that. And I'm wondering, Marie, what if you were having a conversation with yourself at Jackie's age, what would you tell you?
In retrospect?
Yes, given you, the one who was having this amazing tech career at that point, well on your way to what would you tell yourself?
I think I would start with slow down. Just the whole concept of being present really didn't come to me until I started down the path of yoga. But be present. Don't always be thinking of the next best thing, or the next thing, whether it's best or not, that is going to keep you occupied. I think I would also say to myself, listen to your gut. I preach it, but I didn't live it back then. I do now. But your gut instinct is called that for a reason, right? It definitely, I feel anyway, that it has guided me in many, many situations. but it's easy to tamp it down.
Mhm.
It's easy to just say, not right now, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
or, but what about this?
Yeah.
So I think I would say to her, if it doesn't feel right, then it probably isn't right for you, whether it's right for somebody else or not.
Mhm.
I think I would tell her to say something positive to herself every day. And she's really, she's pretty amazing. I'd like to think all my kids are amazing, but she has had a journey, and she has come out on the other side of her own personal journey with such grace, and I cry every time I talk about her. And she journals every day. She's true. I cannot journal. I will tell you right now. I tried to journal when my kids were born just so that I could record the special moments. And I got to like 3 months, and that was it. But so she journals every day. She's always open to, positive affirmations. She tells herself every morning, something good about herself and something good that she has to look forward to. I mean, she's very grounded in that way. And I look at her and I'm like, gosh, I wish I could have been like you. But I'd like to think that I had a part in that.
Well, I was going to say that's you, right? Like that's your influence. I'm sure the woman that she knew as mom, like that groundedness, that checking in with yourself. Like since I've known you, that's who you've been.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's just grown and blossomed.
Yeah.
But you've always had the conversations that we've had were never surface.
Right.
Even if they were brief, like you found ways to know yourself. And yes, did a part of me die inside as a therapist when I hear people say they don't journal? Of course, every time, right?
So sorry.
Just kidding. But you have found a way to know yourself.
Yeah.
It doesn't just have to be journaling. And that's what you've modeled for Jackie.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm happy that I could do that for her because I think it's serving her well. Yeah. So yeah, I think those are the things that I would have told my 26-ish-year-old self. Yeah, and just be proud of who you are. Like don't let anybody take that away from you. Don't let anybody tell you you should be anything other than who you are. Body image has always been an issue in my family.
Yeah.
And we were just joking not too long ago about this. When she was little, there was a store called Justice. Do you remember Justice,
of course.
The store?
Yes.
Her body was just not designed to wear clothes from Justice, and it was tormenting her because all of her friends could go and just pick anything off the rack. And she said to me not too long ago, she said, I just really want to thank you for guiding me out of that store, leading me out of that store, and taking me to places where I could find things that I felt like I was doing. And I was like, yeah, I did that.
Yes.
Yeah, I did that. I had forgotten about it, but but yeah, I think that is such a big thing, particularly with women, and I'll be honest, I have struggled with that my whole life because of the messaging that, I got when I was little. But I think that as I've gotten older, one of the other things that this time away from the working part of my life has allowed me to do is really kind of say, look around. There are all sorts of shapes and sizes of people, and they're all doing the best that they can.
Yes.
And the stuff, if people are going to make a judgment about you, about the way you look, then you don't need them in your life anyway.
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
So did that answer your question?
Yes. Okay. Beautifully said. One of the things that you said too, that's in noticing who you are and owning who you are, that requires recognizing, first of all, knowing yourself. But you talked about not recognizing the accomplishments as they were happening.
Yeah.
And I do think when you're socialized or raised to give or to fix or to be there for others in whatever way, it's so easy to miss, who we are. Who am I bringing to this table? Not what am I giving to the table, but who am I at this table? But the world shifts. I love how you talked about in the last year how your world shifted because that you have to look through an entirely different lens when you're considering yourself at the table.
Yes.
And it does require this protectiveness and once we understand our identity, I think we start protecting it, and valuing it.
And there's when you recognize that there's worth in that. I've had conversations with several colleagues since I left my most recent teaching job, who have also left. And one of them was very honest with me. She said, I was really surprised when you decided to leave because you're so young. Well, first of all, I think people don't realize how old I really am. I can thank my mom for that because I got her genes. When I tell people that I'm going to be 65, they kind of look at me and go, you sure? You sure? Check that calendar. So there was the age factor, but also I think they saw what most people saw. It's okay. That's fine. We're puppy people.
Friend.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
No, there's no food.
Is she a doodle?
Yes.
Yeah, she's very cute. Oh, but she's in her happy place. Have a nice walk. I think that, they saw what everyone saw, which was that she comes into work every day and she puts on the mindfulness teacher hat and she goes in and she does the class and then she saves it for when she gets home.
Yes.
And then she collapses. Yes. And to not have to do that anymore is so freeing. Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's just to show up however I am. And I mean, there are days when I'm not great.
Yeah.
Not every day is perfect, but to just show up and to not feel, we were having dinner last night, my husband, my younger son and I, and to just be able to just be there 100% for what's happening and not feel like, oh, I've got to go do the laundry or, oh, I've got to get my lesson plans ready for tomorrow, to just be able to have enough, I don't even know what the word is, but to be able to say no to all of that stuff because this is where I want to be in this moment and to have the freedom, I guess, to make that choice. Whereas before, I don't think I felt like I had that freedom. I felt like the bus was being driven for me. That's literally the school bus. Yeah. So that's.
Well, that feels like a drop the mic moment.
Yeah.
I feel like you summarized beautifully, like your life, like in that sentence, right? Like how far you've come, and to be able to now show up to spaces 100%. My goodness, that's the dream.
It is.
That's the dream, right? Like to be able to do that, especially at a time when you have the vitality to be able to enjoy it, and the people in your life, to where when you are at your 100%, you're surrounded by love and community, and you have health in a body that works, and like what an amazing gift. And speaking of gifts, thank you so much.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
This has
Really,
been
I
lovely.
enjoyed it. I hope what I've said is cohesive enough to make some sense.
Well, I've learned some things, so I'm very grateful for that. So thank you, Marie, and I look forward to more conversation.
Indeed. Thank you, Lindy.
So again, Caitlan, like I said, it was such an amazing experience hearing Marie's story, and I hope everyone gained a little bit from it. I know I did. And Caitlan, while you are not in the burnout break room, where can we find you?
So you can find me at CaitlinTruhella.com. So first and last name. And you can find me on all the socials, TikTok, Instagram primarily. For anybody that's looking for author support or general creative support, I do ideation sessions and creative coaching. And Lindy, when you are not in the burnout break room, where can people find you?
So best place to find me is my website, lindylarimore.com. I'm also on all the socials. At my website, you can find out more about the coaching and consulting work that I do. I work with clinics and small businesses, some nonprofits, in improving their leadership and creating spaces that prevent burnout and promote thriving work groups. So yes, thank you so much, Caitlan. It has been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Lindy. And we will see you next time in the break room.